the first name.
A little bit.
The first time. Anyway, and my brother's here. He's a week here.
Right now.
Yeah. So they named her here.
In this resort or just in this resort?
We were in RV park.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have your attention for just a moment, I want to welcome you to our wine and cheese social here at Club Trinidad. We do this every week, one time a week, for 20, this is our 20th year now. And Yona and I, this is Yona over here. She and I together, just come on in, help yourself, get back to the table, find yourself a seat, pull up a plate. Anyway, Yona and I have been doing this for 20 years, and we do it for two reasons. The first reason is so that we can get our guests, our newly arrived guests that came in on a Sunday, we can get them to sit down and break bread, have a few little snacks, drink some wine, have a social with each other, because we get here from all over the world. People are here from everywhere. We've got people here from Great Britain or England. Pete and Susan are here, of course they're owners and have been owners for a number of years, but they're not here tonight. They're over on the other side. Pete's not feeling well. I think the weather over here is bothering him. He's missing his English weather. Anyway, we have people coming in from all areas, and it's nice that our thermometer can read in the low 80s, upper 80s, mid 80s, wherein there's people all over our country that are suffering right now, as you know, having some pretty bad temperatures and blizzards and things everywhere. Palm Springs is very fortunate. We don't have that problem. But we get everybody together and we try to eliminate the air of strangership. And you have a glass of wine with people, you share a little party with people, a little social. Then the rest of the week, while you're sitting by the pool, enjoying the beautiful sunshine, you will be out there sitting with other people that you may have seen at the, probably saw at the wine and cheese social. So you might not remember their names, but you'll say, well, at least, I think that's somebody from Missouri or somebody from Canada or whatever. Anyway, that the air of strangership is removed, and we hope it'll be a little more pleasant for you to enjoy the swimming pool with people that you've enjoyed being socializing with. The second reason for our wine and cheese social is so that yours truly, the self-appointed historian of Club Trinidad, can share some of the history of this rather historical resort with you. Most of you, except the owners, they already know this because many of them lived through some of the yesteryears and the battles that we've had with the developer and the management companies and these lawsuits that we've been through. But they're all over with now. And the Owners Association is made up of a group of people that own this entire resort collectively. We don't have a developer here. We don't have outside management. I've been here since 1984 when I bought a timeshare here. And then in 1988, I ended up being on the board of directors. In 1989, I filed a lawsuit against the developer and the management company and fought it for 5.5 years. It then turned out to be 5 lawsuits, and I won all 5 of them. So I didn't like what was going on, and when they put me on the board, I could see that our association was being taken advantage of financially. So I went after the people that were doing it. And 5.5 years later, we won all the lawsuits. Meanwhile, in 1991, I became the CEO of the association. and I'm still the CEO of the association. So that's been 24 years ago, and I retired from law enforcement in 1995. I was a narcotics officer, and I gave that up after 26 years and hung it up. And I came down here and kind of took over as manager here because we kept hiring management companies and they were all crooks, as far as I was concerned. So I'd keep firing them. Finally the board says, well, Art, you'll have to manage. I don't know anything about managing a Club Trinidad or resort. I'm a police officer. I lock people up. They said, not anymore, you don't, because you've retired. And they said, we need you to manage it. So Yona and I set up a management company, and I said, I don't know how you expect us to do this. We don't have any training or any experience. They said, just do what you've been firing the people that what they did. Just don't do what you fired them for, and do what you think they should have done. And I said, so we've been doing that since 1998, and that's what we're still doing. I'm still trying to learn how to manage a resort. I do it day by day, and I learn something every day, ladies and gentlemen. But back long before it became a timeshare in the 1980s, this place was built in 1960. Oh, by the way, I'm going to introduce you to Gail in just a minute, but before I get it, we're going to be interrupted in a moment when Marilyn Monroe arrives. She's going to show up, and I see if the truck is going to say that, but ladies and gentlemen, we do have our own Marilyn Monroe, and she will be arriving, I believe. She didn't say, call and give me the word that she wasn't going to show, so I think she'll be here, and when she does, we'll probably turn it over to her, let her entertain you a little bit, and then I'll get on with some of my story of Club Trinidad. But ladies and gentlemen, the place was built in 1960. That was 55 years ago, this November. So it's an older facility. Yona does not like me to use the word old. However, I do say it's an experienced resort. We have a lot of experience. It was built as the Trinidad Hotel and Condos, and it had a nightclub on the other side of that wall at the east end of the pool. It was called the Purple Room in 1960. Ironically, it's called the Purple Room again today. Yona and I renamed it the Purple Room 3 years ago when we ran it, and now we have people that are running it. They're still calling it the Purple Room, and they've tried to establish it to the Purple Room that it was in 1960. And they're getting pretty close, and it's a busy place. It's busy. It's closed on Monday nights, but starting tonight, it'll be open until Sunday, and it'll be busy. You'll see that with the parking problems that they have here, which I'm dealing with. I'm taking care of it. I'm rewriting the contract for the Purple Room so that we're putting clauses in there. I'm going to require them to, or suggest that they hire a valet. Park the cars for all the people coming to the Purple Room. Now you people, if you want to visit the Purple Room, you can just walk right into the lobby and go on in. Be sure, and I think you should tell them that you are a guest staying at the facility, and they have a happy hour from 4 until 7 at great prices. But I'm going to call Gail right now, if Gail's tour is up, and let her, when you talked to her or heard from her on yesterday morning, that she's has the best tour company in the county, and I wanted to tell you about the tours and what's available to you. Hi, Gail.
Hey, Mr. Art. Hey, crew. I met most of you Monday, and those of you that I didn't meet, welcome. In fact, you know what I think we're going to do is go around, and you can say hi and tell everybody who you are, where you're from, and how long you're going to be here, and all the good stuff. I apologize for my phone. I got a new phone this week, and my old phone, you know, would make calls, and every now and then it would ring. But with this new phone, you might have heard it a few minutes ago, it says so-and-so is calling, And it tells everything about them, and it's kind of embarrassing when you're with a bunch of people, and I had to turn it down, so my apologies for my phone. I like the old one. You know, I like the older days when you have your own phone in your house, and it would ring, and then sometimes we discovered that it was really nice to have a recording, and so you'd have a recorded message when you got home. Remember those days? I like that. Speaking of going home, who are you? Where are you from?
Nick and Julian Jackie from Montana.
Montana. How's your weather? Very, very cold. Isn't it fun to call home and say, oh, it's almost 100 degrees today, but we're going to weather it.
Judy and Larry Anderson from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Oh, yes, that's cold.
Yes, and we left in below zero weather too, so it's nice to be here. And we're checking out tomorrow, so we've enjoyed our stay.
Good.
Very nice clientele of very friendly people.
Yeah.
We appreciate how everybody has welcomed us here.
And friendly people here, but out in the community, were we friendly too? I mean, when you went into the shops and restaurants?
Absolutely.
I always wonder how people perceive us, but good.
David Sue, Wisconsin, so keeping the theme of cold weather. Along with early day Sunday, we won't here for 10 years.
I actually was staying at a resort. I exchanged for a resort in San Diego, and I never went home. And that was 35 years ago.
Carol and Karen Ullman were from Southwest Minnesota.
Wow.
But it's been great, except we talked about the parking, and we did have our car broken in. The second day we were here. Yeah, they didn't steal anything, but, or very little. We had most of the stuff in, but I would agree with you, the parking is.
Wow.
Who wants it?
There's a guy with their
Bart and Pete Northey. We are from Ontario, Canada, around the Toronto area. And we're here until March 8th.
This is my wife. This is my wife Cheryl. My name's Al. We're from around the London, Ontario area, Canada. And we're here for
And it's cold in Ontario.
Yeah.
My daughter told me this morning, the kids didn't go to school, it's -20.
How many inches?
Not too much, actually, you know, she can get over the snow pile, but hasn't been fresh snow, but it's been.
Wow. I don't know.
And Jordan, partner Shirley, you're from Nebraska.
Yeah.
We're really happy to have all of you. I think most of you heard about the tour. I did put on a Friday tour. We filled up for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and we do have some seats available for Friday now. I just put that on a few minutes ago because everything else was full and we have a lot of people waiting. So I think I've got 4 seats left on Friday. Anyone that wants to go, my suggestion is do it this week because this has been the best week for the tour and the weather is so good. I'll go through it real quick. I know some of you were all here yesterday morning, weren't you, everybody? Okay, it's a van that we're using this year. Jeff Gardner from the Discovery Channel. He is the one that's leading the tour. He's really good. He's going to take you through areas with natural lakes and streams and ponds and rivers and waterfalls. Jeff is going to show you areas like the San Andreas Fault, the windmills that everybody wants to see while they're here. Movie stars. Oh, we've got so many of them that live here or lived here. And we're going to show you all of their homes. The Follies was such a great show. We're going to take you to Oscars, and Oscars is located right behind the Follies building. And the food is delicious, and if you want to do it, I'm doing it cheap. Come see me tonight. I'm going to be over here for a minute, and whatever you do this week, I want you to have fun. Sunshine, blue skies, swaying palm trees. I thought I saw a glimpse of her, but I guess she's not here yet. So, you want the microphone back, or is there somebody that would like to talk? Anyone? All right, I'll come back to you, Mr. Art. There he is.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have a chance to see her before she leaves and sign up for the tour, you won't regret it, because I can assure you it is a great tour, and we get nothing but the finest compliments from all of our guests that go on the tour. They have a good time. Remember, her prices of the tour includes lunch. So when you go, your lunch is included. I want to get back to what I was saying until if Marilyn shows up, of course she will make her grand entrance and interrupt us. But if it hadn't been for Palm Springs, there wouldn't have been a Marilyn Monroe. She was discovered here when she was Norma Jean, and she was 16 years old, and she was at the Racket Club, and the northern end of Palm Springs is no longer there. It's been leveled, as have been many of the great old buildings and the historic buildings of Palm Springs have been taken away. We happen to be fortunate enough to still be here. But she will tell you when she gets here, and if she doesn't arrive, I will tell you how it all happened later on. Right now, I want to tell you a little something about the historical part of Club Trinidad, or what used to be Hotel Trinidad. We had, like I said, it was built in 1960, ladies and gentlemen. And in 1960, in January, when they started building in this place, Palm Springs was 1.5 miles that way. We are in Palm Springs now, but it didn't used to be that way. But when we were built here, it was built in the desert, in the rolling sands and desert. And I am fortunate enough to have a video of the building of this hotel. And the video was made originally on an 8mm projector, reel-to-reel. And I was fortunate enough a few years ago, 15, 20 years ago, to meet the gentleman that designed it and built it. And I went to his home in Torrance, California, and he told me about that this was the first job he had when he got out of service. The military had taught him to be an architect, and he was building bridges for the Army. And when he got out, he got a job working for Metropolitan Builders out of Beverly Hills, California, very wealthy man, owned the company. And he says his first job, the boss told him, he says, "Gary, I want you to go to Palm Springs and build me a hotel." He said, "I bought a piece of land out in the desert and go down there and build it." And he did. He came out and built this place, and he had made a color reel-to-reel tape, 20 minutes long on the building. It took 11 months to build it, on the building of all the buildings here. And it was kind of strange because when you see just the land, when they started digging the footings and pouring the concrete here for this building, this was the first one, of course, and then there's 6 more buildings just north of us that house the condos. When you're looking at the video today, you can see them pouring the concrete, and you can see there's nothing around us. It's just open desert. There was a 2-lane highway out here called Highway 111, one blacktop lane going east and one going west, and that was it. Today, There's 3 lanes going east, 3 lanes going west, and 2 service roads on either side of it. So we've got 10 lanes, 6 and 4 and 10 lanes counting the 2 service roads. And of course there was no shopping centers across the street, there were no condos or any type of buildings around us. We were out here by ourselves. The only building that was out here was across the street where Ralph's is. Many of you shopped at Ralph's, Smoke Tree Shopping Center. There was a building over there that was built by hand back years ago. There was a log cabin, big log cabin. And it had a porch across the front of it, and it had a sign above the porch that said, Smoke Tree Tack and Feed Store. And in front of it, of the porch, it had 2 horse rails where you thought the ranchers, local ranchers, would come up here with their horse and wagon, tie their horses up to in the sand, tie them up to in front of the store and go in and buy their tack and feed and anything that they wanted to get. They didn't go into the Palm Springs Village because they had automobiles in there. And they didn't want to take their horse and wagons and be messing around automobiles. So they'd come to the tack and feed store, and that was the 1960s. Some people think that sounds more like the 1880s, but it does sound like the 1880s, but it was 1960 with nothing here. And so when they built the hotel and the condos, the 6 buildings next to us housed 21 2-bedroom, 2-bath condos. And the tack and feed store had a stable right behind it called Smoke Tree Stables. It's still here today, but it's not in the same place. It's been moved 1.5 miles that way, over near the hills, rolling hills over there, because everybody came in here and started building up around here, and the stables had to be transferred to another piece of Pleasant. But it was very ironic because in the time, in the 1960s, which was only 55 years ago, all the movie stars had been coming here for about 20 years. They started in the 40s and the 50s. And the reason movie stars started coming out here, ladies and gentlemen, is recall back in those days, in the 40s during the Second World War, and in the 30s even, all the movie stars that we remember from our earlier days, the famous movie stars, Clark Gable, Randolph Scott, people like that, these people work under contract to the studio. Movie stars today aren't under contract. They just have an agent, and if they're good enough and have a good enough name, they charge you $20, $30 million to make a movie. Back then, everybody was under contract. Clark Gable in the late 30s and early 40s made $300 a week, which back then was good money. But $300 a week was his pay whether he did any acting or not. And he got that every week. A lot of people made $150, $200 a week under contract. And their contract stated that if you leave Hollywood, where all the studios are, and you go anywhere, you've got to leave a telephone number where you can be reached. Because everybody under contract was on 24-hour call. And the studio says, whenever you leave town, you leave a number. There were no cell phones back then, so you had to get a phone number of a hotel or a friend that you were going to go and visit somewhere out of town, and you had to be able to get to the studio within 2 hours. They only gave you a 2-hour limit. And if you didn't meet that 2-hour limit, then your punishment was a horrendous amount of money, fine. They would take your wages away from you for 2 or 3 weeks or something like that. And that was in your contract. So the Hollywood stars began to look around and see, because Hollywood was a rat race back in those days too, just like it is today. There was 10 million people living in the LA basin. So they said, we have to get away from these people. We have to get away from the crowds. So they started looking around, where can we go to play tennis, play golf, or just take a weekend off? But if the studio calls us, it's got to be within 2 hours. So they found Palm Springs. Many of them even came down here, ladies and gentlemen, and built homes here, even though they had a home in Hollywood. They'd come out here and live in their home, and if they got a call, they were 1 hour and 50 minutes from the studio, so they could make it, and they didn't get punished. And after a while, the people who put them under contract began to come out here and look around. The people, the producers and the directors, and right behind the tack and feed store across the street and the stables. From here, from Club Trinidad on this point, to the hills over here where they had Bob Hope's house up on top of one of those hills, the big dome house, that is 4.5 miles as the crow flies. Doesn't look like it's that far, but it is. And from here to the mountains west of us is 13.5 miles. And so in that 4.5 miles by 13.5 mile rolling hills, there was nothing over there, ladies and gentlemen, but sand and a few little ranchettes. But the ranchers would come to the tack and feed store with their horse and wagon. And so the directors came out here and the producers, and they said, look, we've been driving to the Mojave Desert with big crews and to the Arizona Red Mountains and everything. We've got a place that we can film right in Palm Springs. It's only 2 hours away. So they started coming down here and filming right across the street. In the early, sometime back in the 60s and 70s, when you and I were watching television, those of you who are old enough to watch television in the 60s and 70s, remember the old TVs had antennas on top of the house, and you only got a few stations, a few programs. But we watched a show, Western, one night a week with Steve McQueen in it. And it had Wanted Dead or Alive. Steve McQueen was a bounty hunter. And you know what? That whole 6-year run of that show that we watched one night during the week with Steve McQueen was filmed right across the street in that 4.5 mile by 13.5 mile area. That's where they drive the trucks with the cameras on them, and they would follow the horses around, and Steve would go out and he would round up anybody in that area that had a bounty on their head. Anywhere from $100, $500 to $5,000. And he'd bring them into the marshal dead or alive and get his reward and go out and shoot somebody else. And at the same time, the same studio had another Western that we watched, another night of the week. And it had a gentleman in it dressed in black. And he handed a business card out and said, "Have gun, road travel, paladin." Richard Boone, filmed in the same area. I always wondered how Richard Boone could rent out his gun to the local ranchers whose herds were being, rustled by the bad guys. When Steve McQueen in the same area had already rounded up everybody with bounty on their head, and there were crooks over there. But every week, Richard Boone rented his gun out to somebody in that same area and got his money and ran off the bad guys or killed them. And both of those people, Steve with his wife, Allie McGraw at the time, spent so much time in our bar because there was nothing else here. The club and the hotel, and they stayed here. Richard Boone used to stay here while he was shooting Paladin. He stayed in a hotel room. Allie and Steve rented a room on the other side. Anyway, a condo on the other side, but they were in the bar drinking, and the movie stars would come out here, ladies and gentlemen, in droves. Duke Wayne, John Wayne was here all the time. Telly Savalas he loved this place. He's the guy that made the lollipop famous. And Who Loves You, Baby? He just hang out here all the time. And he stayed here all the time. And all of these people used to stay here until they came out here and built homes. Every one of them built homes here in the desert. And then they moved to their homes, and they'd just come back to the club to drink. But this was the party place. And the movie stars would come out here and they would hang out here at the Trinidad. This at the Purple Room. And it became a place where they weren't bothered because the city or the town was a mile and a half away. And they didn't have anybody in here that bothered them. And most everybody else that was in here were all celebrities themselves. That's where they were hanging out. So they hung out in our place here. And this went on from 1960 until 1980. And then a few years after that, but it began to dwindle off in the 80s because we became a timeshare. And a developer came in and started selling timeshares. Didn't want to rent rooms, and he didn't want to do this, but the bar had been turned over to somebody else that has had many different names in the 55 years. But it started out as the Purple Room, and had names like Patty Z's and Janie Z's, and there were the Victor's and nightclub, and then there was a place called the Caribbean Lounge. All of these had runs here, but now it's back as the Purple Room today. And if you go in there, ladies and gentlemen, you'll see, because the Rat Pack used to hang out here, Frank Sinatra was here almost all the time. When he wasn't on location shooting a movie, singing in a club, had a gig somewhere in the world, this is where he lived. He had 4 homes. Frank had 4 homes. From the time he started hanging out in Palm Springs until he died. And the last one was in Rancho Mirage that he had built back in the 50s, in the mid to late 50s. And that was his last home. His third home was over here in the movie colony where Gail takes you around to see some of those. Frank Sinatra had a home over there when he was married to Ava Gardner. And he left Nancy and the 3 kids and divorced her and married Ava. And their marriage lasted 2.5 years, and it was right here in Palm Springs, and they fought the whole time. They were the fightingest people in the world. Both of them were feisty. You know, Ava was from right near Wilmington, North Carolina. She was a Southern girl, grew up down there. There's a million stories, but the 2 of them fought so much physically in restaurants. She'd slap him and he'd slap her, and then she'd walk out and everybody sit around. Nobody's going to say anything because it's Ava and Frank. They don't say anything. They just let them do their thing. But it was embarrassing, and Ava finally left him and went to Europe. And he followed her all over Europe trying to get her back. He couldn't. Well, she left him before Club Trinidad was built. And they built the Trinidad in '60, and he started hanging out here because he went out and built a home in Rancho Mirage, and he did all of his drinking in Palm Springs because there were no bars in Rancho Mirage. It was just a little village. And he would drive down this 111 highway into Palm Springs. He had to drive by the Trinidad and the Purple Room. So he'd stop for his early evening drinkings. He'd hang out in here with his entourage, and then they would go into Palm Springs. They had other bars they liked to hit down there. And as you know, Frank was quite a drinker. He drank his way through life. And he did that right here at the Trinidad until 1977. And he married Barbara Marks. She had been she was a widow of Harpo Marks. And they were neighbors of Frank out in Rancho Mirage. All the Marks homes, 4 Marks brothers had homes right together. And Frank was had a big estate right next to them. And so when Harpo died, he was the first of the Marx brothers to go. His wife was wealthy when he married her, and he was even more wealthy after she inherited his fortune. She was a very successful businesswoman. So Barbara subsequently married Frank. They dated about a year and a half after Harpo's death for a while. And then in 1977, he proposed. And he proposed to her over an early dinner in the Purple, or not Purple, in the lounge at Club Trinidad that the room right here. It was about 5:30 in the evening, and they were sitting there having dinner, and they'd been courting for a while. And he asked her to marry him, and she agreed, accepted, and he got up, walked to the piano. There was a piano player sitting there playing background music for the people in the restaurant. About half full, and at the time, it was a little early in the day. And so he announced over the PA system, he says, I just proposed to Barbara Marks, and she's accepted my proposal, and we're going to be married, and I want you people here to be the first to know. They all applauded, and of course everybody knew Barbara, and they knew Frank. And he says, I am personally inviting each and every one of you to the wedding. We haven't planned it. We don't know when it's going to be, but when it's, you'll hear about it. And says, when it is, you're all invited. And you won't get an invitation. You're getting it now. He says, you come up to the Catholic Church where we're going to be married in Cathedral City area. And he said, tell the people at the door that you're my personal guest from the Trinidad when I invited you on the day I proposed. That's all you have to say, and they will let you in. And a number of those people went to the wedding, and they were admitted. He didn't know them, they didn't know him, but they were admitted. And everybody else was by written invitation only. A number of those people over the years have told me, I met with a lot of them, and some of them that were invited that didn't go. But they told me that we could have gone because we were invited. And the ones that did go said we didn't have a problem getting in. But when he married Barbara in '77, she told him in no uncertain terms, because she didn't marry him for his money. She had as much money as Frank did. So she told him that, Frank, you've been hanging around saloons and bars all your life. We're getting old, man. You got to slow down. And she said, I don't want you, if you're married to me, I don't want you going out every night. I'm not going with you to the bars and saloons. That's not my thing. So she said, you go once in a while, but you're not going every night. And he said, yes, dear. That's the way it was. And she took him out of the bars, and she took him out of the saloons, and she made a philanthropist out of it. And he and Barbara raised money for hospitals, for the underprivileged and the children of abused children and abused wives. Barbara set up her own foundation, still going today. She's still running it today right here in the desert. She is highly respected for this, but she took him out of that, and they built a wing of the hospital down in Palm Springs at the Desert Regional Center. They built the Sinatra wing on there for $300 or $400 million. They built a wing on the hospital out in Palm Desert that's known as the Eisenhower Hospital. They built a wing on the hospital in the John Kennedy Hospital in India. They built a church that Frank and Barbara got married in. They rebuilt that church, thanks to Dolly Sinatra, his mother, because she said, Dolly lived in New Jersey. She was in Hoboken. Frank's dad had died. He was a fireman. He had been buried in Hoboken, and Dolly was living there by herself. So Frank said, Mom, come on out here and live with me. I'm going to build you a home on my estate. So she did. She moved down here, and then she said, but I can't visit your dad. So he went back, had his dad dug up, and brought him out here, put him in Forest Lawn right here in Palm Springs. And Dad was buried there and reburied out here. Now Dolly's buried next to him. And then Frank's buried next to her. And then the site's over. Jilly is his best friend most of his life, that died right up the street here in an automobile accident. They're all buried right up the street here. As a matter of fact, that's the only cemetery I've ever seen, that when you go in, they have a little house up there, and they pass out invitations to people that come in there with directions on how to get to all the people's graves. There's so many movie stars buried out there because so many of them moved out here and they didn't want to be buried in LA, so they got buried here. And now the tourists go out there and drive around the cemetery and stop at all these different graves. Loretta, Young, everybody that was big stars back then are all buried right here in the cemetery. So they have them all. They have them all labeled with the map on how to get to your favorite stars place. I said most cemeteries aren't really tourist attractions, but this one has turned out to be. But anyway, Barbara took him out of the saloons, and she took him out of the Trinidad. After that, he only came in here a few times between 78 and 80. And those few times he came in, he was always welcome, but you know what? Then it became a timeshare and he went to other places and he went out. But during the 80s to the 60s and 70s, up until 77, he was here more than he was at home. And one of the little stories that I like to share is it happened right here in 1961. Frank, on a Saturday night, driving his Jaguar, four-door Jaguar. Oh my goodness, ladies and gentlemen, we just have, I think Marilyn has arrived. Hi, darling. I'll pick that up later. I'm afraid that she's going to want to take it over now. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I'll pick it up where I left off. I've shared some stories with you that I haven't been telling lately because I don't like to tell the same one. Where's my hug?
Oh, yes, sir. Hi. Thank you.
That's your mic right there.
Yes. Hello.
Ladies and gentlemen, Marilyn Monroe, I'm going to let her take it over here since she takes care of a few things and she's going to entertain you a little bit. Yes.
Am I turned on?
Yes.
Oh. My goodness, I'm here. Please forgive me for being late. You know, it's a big modernism. Oh, we have Canada people here. We have Canada people. Hi! Isn't it nice and warm, huh? It's so cold there. I saw your weather. My goodness. I don't know how to do it. Well, first of all, I have to ask, is anybody having a birthday? Really? What's your name? Well, on behalf of Club Trinidad and Mr. Art and Yona and all the family and friends here that left the door here, we have a wonderful message just for you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr. President Al. Happy birthday to you. Many more. Oh, I pleasure. Do you have a picture? Do you have your cell phone or camera? Well, if anybody does and would like pictures, it's my greatest pleasure to give pictures for you. And if you want to run up to your room, it'd be all right with me too. If you have a camera or something. Or maybe even, we're so modern today, you know, somebody else could take a picture on their cell phone and email it to you. I had to learn all those things. Hello, darling. Wow, where are you from? Are you really? How lovely. You know what? I was really hoping that those Green Bay boys would do well, but unfortunately, maybe next year, huh? Yeah. How sweet. What a wonderful thing to say. Well, you know, hi! Come on down and join us. We've got a glass of wine waiting for you. Okie dokie. Well, Mr. Art told you that if it wasn't for Palm Springs, I would have never been discovered. Well, you see, I was born in 1926. Isn't the miracle of science fantastic? And that was during the Depression, and of course we had the World Wars, a couple of them, and lots of stuff. That's when I was born, and my mother was a member of the motion picture trade union industry. Yes, she was a film cutter. And every single day she would take me into that lab with her when she would cut on the film. And I'd watch all these beautiful, adventurous, smart, fantastic women who I wanted to grow up to be just like them. I really watched and I learned a lot. And you know, Millicent Van Zandt, who was Mother's best lady friend, was in charge of ladies' elocution in the studio system. And she said, you know, Gladys, that was Mama's name. You know, Gladys, you really should start a trust fund for little Norma Jean. That was my name. Because it's like she was born into the studio system because you've been working here and it's the legacy. So that's what she did. And, of course, I got to stay there for the very longest time until the truant officer came one day and made me go to regular school. But then when I was 12 years old, I got to come to the studio system and take lots of classes. And you know, all because of the war, we had the most genius people that were just kind of displaced. But we had Michael Chekhov. He was in charge of all the theater drama and all the studio system. And we had Julie Stein. He was in charge of the music. And we had Nick Castle. He was in charge of all the dancing. He worked at Buzzard Berkeley. Those were my teachers. I worked really hard and I got to be a model and there was lots of advertisement pictures that were taken and I was an extra on the film set and I took lots of classes and Miss Millicent Van Zandt, she was Mother's best friend. She would always escort me to the Hollywood parties. Of course it was just for PR and pictures, but I never got to go by myself. And there was always this one man there who was always staring at me, taking down all kinds of notes. It was a little ominous. And I said, Millie, who's that man? He's always watching. He never talks to me. He just takes down notes and watches. She said, don't worry about him, darling. That's Johnny High. That's Hollywood's biggest agent. And he's had his eye on you for quite some time since you've been working so well in the studio system. That they're thinking about representing you because they have a brand new screenplay that's just been written by the great author, Mr. William Inge, who adapted his stage play, Bus Stop. And they're thinking about you for that part. I said, well, she said, and we've got to leave this party. You're supposed to be on the set for the chorus girl scene at 6 a.m. and you won't look good. Let's go. So she made me go. I never even got to talk to anybody. So I kept working hard and on the set and going to classes. And then I went to class one day and Mr. Chekhov said, you know, Norma, we've got you in mind for this new part. And because the sides aren't going to be released, that means the pages of the script. He said, we will have you audition with the Tennessee Williams piece. Because if anybody knows women, Tennessee Williams knows women. And that's what this story is all about. I said, okay. So they had me audition for that part in a Tennessee Williams play called Orpheus Descending and a part of Lady Torrance. Well, do you know, before I even could get back home from the studio that afternoon, the phone was ringing off its little cradle. And I finally talked to Millie. She said, honey, we did it. Pack your bag. You're going to Palm Springs for the weekend and make sure that you put a bathing suit in that train case. And I said, what for? She said, well, darling, don't you know that's where everybody goes to sign all the contracts and to talk business, all the big producers and directors and actors and everybody. And Mr. Johnny Hyde is representing you now, and you've been chosen for this part, and so you need to go so they can get a look at you. I didn't like that idea at all. To get a look at me, that sounds like some kind of horse train. Anyway, so there we were on the train, going to Palm Springs, and we stepped off. Boy, was it dry and hot. Beautiful, but so hot. So then he said, Norma Jean, go put on your swimsuit and lay out by the pool. So I did. Oh, I was trying to look as lovely as possible, but I was dripping with water. It wasn't pretty. And I didn't know what to say. I was a little embarrassed. And all these gentlemen kept walking by saying, hello, hello. And I could just say hello back. And I was a little excited, but I really didn't know what else to say until this one man, very tall and lanky, came by. He looked at me and he said, what's your name? And before I could ever say a word, Johnny Hyde jumped out from someplace. He said, she's my client. He said, well, John, when you get back to the city, bring her to my office. And he just walked away. And Johnny was so excited, he said, we're in! Oh my goodness, I never saw anybody. And I said, I didn't know what we were in, but we were sure happy, so I was glad that he was glad about it. So when we got back, sure enough, We went to the studio gate at 20th Century Fox, and there was my name with Johnny Hyde, Norma Jean Baker. And you know who we were going to go see? Mr. John Houston. That's right, that was a gentleman in Palm Springs who wanted to sign me at 20th Century. So when we walked into the office, he stood behind that big desk, and Johnny, of course, over in the corner like always, taking notes. And I was very nervous. He said, well, dear, we've seen you on the set. We've seen you in your screen test, and we know that you have been working hard. We have an idea that you just might be the right one for this new screenplay we've got. What exactly is your name? I said, Norma Jean Baker. He said, that will never do. I didn't know what to say. He said, dear, if there was one name in the whole universe that you could choose, what would that be? And I said, well, sir, I've always liked the name Marilyn. He said, that's it! Oh my goodness, Marilyn Baker, isn't that lovely? He said, no, darling, that would never do. I said, well, sir, I've always liked my daddy's name. You know, my mom and dad were never married. My father's name was John Monroe. He said, that's it! How do you do, Marilyn Monroe? Sign here. Well, I signed that paper, and my goodness, I really had to think about that. Making an M instead of an N. I didn't want to mess up the very first thing they asked me to do. Well, I was very glad I had a new name, and I looked at Johnny, and there was a mirror on the wall, and I looked at the mirror, and I said, Marilyn Monroe? I still saw Norma Jean Baker. He said, don't worry about that, darling. We're going right around the corner here to hair and makeup. We're going Hollywood. Well, you know what he meant by that? I had auburn golden hair, and they cut it off really short and bleached it blonde and put glamorous makeup with eyelashes. And the gentleman from Max Factor, his name was Lighty, and he's the one that gave me that. He said, if anyone asks you, dear, you just tell them that's where the angels kissed you when you arrived. Well, I was very, very grateful that they finally paid attention, but I was also very grateful to Miss Norma Jean Baker. Because Miss Norma Jean, who worked so very hard and took all those classes and really, really paid attention, if it wasn't for her doing what she did, I would have never been able to go to Palm Springs and be discovered and have a new name as Marilyn Monroe. And that's how it all happened. And we did movies and all kinds of goodies, and I think there was a baseball player and a president and some other people too. But anyway, I had a really good time, and if you like it would be my pleasure to sing a song for you. Would you like that? Okay. Yes. Well now, you know that we just passed Valentine's Day, and Easter or somebody's birthday is right around the corner, so you've got to remember what a girl's favorite thing is. Listen, you might want to turn it up a little bit. Oh, there it is. Here we go. A kiss on the hand, maybe. What continental with diamonds are a best friend. A kiss may be grand, but it won't pay the rental on your humble flat. Or I help you at the laundromat. Men grow cold as girls grow old, and we all lose our charm in the end. But square, cut, or pear-shaped, these rocks don't lose their shape. Diamonds are a girl's best friend. Isn't that right, honey? You're smiling, I can tell you know. There may come a time when a lass needs a lawyer, but diamonds are a girl's best friend. There may come a time when a hard-boiled employer thinks you're awful nice. Get that ice or else no dice. He's your guy when stocks are high, but beware when they start to descend. It's then that those louses go back to the spouses. Diamonds are a girl's best friend. Cartier, Tiffany, Harry Winston, that's my favorite. I've heard of affairs that are strictly platonic, but diamonds are a girl's best friend. And I think affairs that you must keep Masonic a better bet. If little pits give big baguettes, time rolls on, and youth is gone, and we can't straighten up when we bend. But stiff back or stiff knees will stand straight at tears. Diamonds, diamonds. Oh my goodness, yes, 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 yes. I don't mean rhinestones, but diamonds. Are the girl's best. Best friend. It would be my great pleasure. All right, thank you so very much. Thank you, Mr. Art.
Ladies and gentlemen, she reads it about the pictures. The thing about it, when you go home and you tell your friends or relatives back home that you were at the Trinidad in Palm Springs and you were entertained by Marilyn Monroe, they're going to laugh at you. But if you got your camera with you, you say, I kept proof. And then they can say,
Well, he's running first.
okay, but the thing about it is, Marilyn, our Marilyn, and I'll share it with you, her real name is Kathleen Day. This is Mrs. Day, this day, and Kathleen came to Palm Springs a number of years back.
He's back to
And she went, and they used to have, we had a picture of Marilyn because she was discovered here, 28-foot statue of her used to be downtown. Now we missed it, they took it away last year, but we're going to get it back. They're making another one and they're going to bring it in, I hope in the next year or so. But at the base of that statue, that 28-foot statue of Marilyn, they used to have a Marilyn Monroe lookalike contest every year. And Kathleen Day came in here a few years back and she got into the contest. Well, she won hands down. So the second year she came back and they said, you can't get in the contest, you're a shoo-in. So they made her the mistress of ceremonies and she did all of the running of the Marilyn lookalike contest. After that, she was in that mistress of ceremonies, the conductor. So they figured nobody else could beat her, so they were just, and you know, everybody that came in and applied for the Marilyn lookalike contest, some of them were guys in drag, some of them were girls, you know, we had all sorts of people coming in, but, you know, some of the guys in drag look pretty good sometimes, you know, they could dress up pretty good. Anyway, they would come in, and of course Marilyn would be the one, or Kathleen was the one that presented them their trophy and their award when they were selected. But then they took the statue away, so they're not doing that anymore, but we're going to get it back again. And she'll be doing it again because she's been the Marilyn Monroe for Palm Springs ever since the real Miss Monroe met a very, very unseemly and a tragic death at a much too early an age. But anyway, we've got her replacement here now, so we're going to do the best we can. Anyway, get your pictures with her before she leaves. She's going to be around for a while. And I'm going to go back to the story that I was sharing with you about see, some of these things get kind of low over here. Anyway, in 1961, Frank Sinatra pulled up at the drive-thru that many of you parked in when you checked in on Sunday. That was the way it was built. Nothing has changed here since 1960, ladies and gentlemen, as far as the design and the thing goes. I haven't allowed anything to be moved or changed. And the board of directors and the owners have strongly supported me in that. But he pulled up that in 1961 on a Saturday night at 10:30, having his Jaguar, four-door Jaguar, and there was a valet parker working there. His name was Gary also. Not a Gary's name. That's not his name too. Anyway, he was 18 years old, and he was working valet at the Purple Room. And Frank pulled up, and Gary told me this in 2002. He says, you know, Art, I was 18 years old. I just graduated from Palm Springs High School in May, before, 3 months before. And I was trying to earn enough money to go to college. I wanted to be an engineer. So he said, I got this great gig working valet at the Trinidad. And he said, Frank pulls up, and he said, I saw him all the time. He was there a lot. And he said, but I looked at my watch, it was 10:30 at night, and he says he had 3 gentlemen guests with him. He said they weren't any movie stars, because I looked at them and I didn't recognize anybody. He said, but I opened all 4 car doors and let them out, and Frank was the last one to get on. I said, welcome, Mr. Sinatra, and I handed him his valet ticket. So he took the valet ticket and he said, snap, park my car, kid. And they staggered. They'd already been drinking. It was 10:30 at night. They were coming from the direction of Frank's house. So they'd probably been drinking all evening over there. And they were going out, so they came here. And he said they staggered in through the lobby, went on into the Purple Room, and he said, I pulled the Jaguar across the 2-lane road and backed it into the sand over across the street. That's where I parked all my valet cars. And then when they came out, I just drove them around through and opened the doors, and they took them and gave me a nice tip. They went on. He said they went in at 10:30, and he said he was sitting there at his valet booth by himself, and at 12:30, 2 hours later, they walked out. They staggered out. They'd been drinking 2 more hours. And so they kind of staggered out to the valet booth, and he said, Frank handed me the valet ticket. He said, I got ready to bolt across the street to get his car, and he grabbed me by the shoulder. And he said, wait a minute, kid, what's the biggest tip you ever got? And he said, I told him $100, Mr. Sinatra. And he said, go get my car. And he said, I ran across the street, got the car, and I pulled it around, and I opened all 4 doors, and I helped everybody that had been drinking so much into the car. And Frank was driving. He was the last one to get in. And I held his door for him, and Frank got in, and he says, as he got in, he handed me 2 crisp $100 bills. And he asked me, who's the cheapskate that gave you $100? And he said, you, Mr. Sinatra. And he said, Frank looked at me and smiled and said, well, got in the car, and he drove on into town. They got more bars to hit. It's only 12:30 at night, and the bars open till 2. So he said they were going into town, hit more bars. He said, but I didn't really mean to throw an insult at him like that, but the way he asked the question, he's the only one that ever give me $100. He said, I'd gotten some 50s and some 20s. He said, they tipped well here because there's a lot of very wealthy people. But he says, it sounded like an insult, and he said, I was really embarrassed about it. And he says, as badly as I needed those 2 $100 bills to go to college, he said, I didn't spend them, I saved them. And he said, he's sitting in our lobby up here telling me the story, which I already knew the story anyway, because it had been in every book that's ever been written about Sinatra. The whole world knew the story. And he said, Art, would you like to see me? And I said, you bet your bottom I'd like to see me. So he drove me in his car from our drive-through 3 blocks behind the smoke-free shop that's over here in 2002. He had a condo over there in the $600,000-$700,000 ranges. And he lived alone, a single man. He had just retired as a civil engineer. We walked into his living room, and in the front room there was a frame up on the wall. Behind the glass were 2 $100 bills with the inscription across the bottom of it, given to me by Frank Sinatra at the Trinidad Lounge in September 1961, some date in September 7th. Anyway, we were standing there looking at these $2 $100 bills that I already knew about the stories about it, and I was hearing it from the horse's mouth. I kind of liked that. And he said, I thought he was going to cry. He looked at me and he said, Art, I only regret, I should have asked him to sign those $100 bills. They'd be priceless today. In 2002, and I said, you're right, Jerry, they would. I said, but they ain't too shabby the way you got them here, because the whole world knows about them. And I said, you know what? The whole world knows that you framed them, but the whole world hasn't seen them. I said, if you want to, you can put it on eBay, on the internet, and there are people out there that are multi-millionaires that are still great fans of Frank Sinatra. They would pay a pretty penny for those $2 $100 bills in that frame. I said, you can get a good money for them. And he looked at me and smiled. He says, you know, I think you're right, but I don't need the money now. I think I'll just hang on to it. The last time I talked to him was in 2009. 7 years later, he pulled at the drive-thru. He rolled the window down. I said, he said, hi, Art. I said, hi, Jerry. It's good to see you. And he wasn't a drinking person, so he didn't come in the bar. He said, I said, you still got them? He said, they're still on the wall. I said, hang on to them. They're not going to lose value, I tell you. Anyway, that happened right here. Another thing that happened right here that I like to share that I think is one of our biggest movements as far as Frank Sinatra is concerned is Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack. Frank, Dean, and Sam used to hang out in here a lot, especially in the late 50s and late 60s and early 70s. And it was in 1972, I believe, about 72, that there was a lady that was playing the piano in the lounge at the Trinidad, right here on the other side of that wall. She was sitting there. She had just been hired. Her name is Roberta King. She's still alive today, and she is a dear, dear friend of mine. And Roberta told me years ago, when I would follow her around Palm Springs and sing with her, because I like to sing, as you know, from being forced to listen to my songs when they were coming in. I would follow Roberta around and sing with her, and at all the piano bars that she played at. And she would tell me when it wasn't busy about the stories of when she worked at the Trinidad. And she said, I had just come here from Chicago, and my first gig was playing the piano at the Trinidad Lounge. And she said, I had been working there 5 days. I was on my 5th day, the first week. She said I worked 5 nights a week from 7 at night until 1 o'clock in the morning, playing the piano and singing. And she was also a comedian. She had a number of movies, no big stars, but in movies. And she said, I hadn't met Frank, and I hadn't met any big stars, but I was playing on a Tuesday night, and the place was packed. The dining room was full, every chair was taken, the bar was full, the standing room, all the people were all over the place. And she says, I started at 7, and at about 8 o'clock, I'd been working an hour, and I was singing a song when in walks Frank, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., and a 4th gentleman that was real tall and good looking, but she said he wasn't a movie star. I don't know who he was. And they walked right by me, except Frank stopped right here on her right shoulder. Dean, Sammy, and the 4th guy went on by and went to their table in the bar that was reserved for them and sat down. Roberta said, I was petrified. Frank was standing right at my right shoulder, standing right up here, and I could see him out of the periphery of my eye. I'm singing this song, and he's just standing over me. She said, I thought I was going to wet my pants. I was petrified. And have Frank standing there listening to me, and she said, when I finished the song, he bent over, good night, Marilyn, thank you so much, darling. I see see you next week, honey. I'll talk to you before then, okay?
We love you.
Anyway, she says, Frank put $100 bill in her tip jar and says, nice phrasing, honey. He liked the way she phrased her. He was a big personal phrase. That's why he became so famous, I guess, because he phrased songs like nobody else in the world. Anyway, she said, he told her, he said, I'm going to come back in about a half an hour and sing with you. He goes onto the table. About around 8, and Roberta said she was just, here again, she was just petrified. She hadn't even spoken to the man. And she got up, she went to the boss man, Mr. Rizio, who was running the place at that time. And Joe Rizio, Italian fellow. And she said, Mr. Rizio, I'm not feeling well, I'm going to have to go home. She said, the place is packed. And Rizio looked at her and said, you look good, you sound good, you sing good, you play, what's your problem, girl? She said, I broke down, Art, and I started crying. Right, and tears were running all down my face. I told Mr. Rizio, I said, Frank Sinatra just stopped my piano and says he's going to come back and sing with me. I can't play for Frank Sinatra. I've never even met the man. We never rehearsed. I don't even know what keys he sings in. I might not hit the right keys. I can't play for Frank Sinatra. And she said, the boss looked at her, and these are her words, because it's a little crude, but she said, he looked at her and said, listen, honey, he didn't remember her name, she was new. You get your ass into the ladies' room and sit down and then get control of yourself or whatever it is you girls do in there. Powder your nose or whatever. And he says, and quit crying. And he says, when you're finished, you come back out and have a double of whatever it is that you drink. And then you get your ass back to the piano. You're not going to say no to Mr. Sinatra. Roberta says, Art, I realized at that moment that I had just been fired if I didn't do what I was told to do. She said, I ran crying to the ladies' room, and I went in there, and I sat down at the same mirror, sat down with the lights all around it, and a little place for the ladies to sit and put on their makeup. She said, I cried for about 5 minutes, and I finally stopped. And I used a half a box of Kleenex. My mascara had run all down my face. I looked like a witch. She said, I used a half a box of Kleenex cleaning my face. I put on new mascara. She said I was in there a good 20 minutes. And I came out of the restroom, and at the corner of the bar where Paladin used to sit when he ate every night, when he was doing his movies, doing Paladin. She said, there's a little cutoff section of the bar right outside of the ladies' room, and there's one bar stool there. There's only room for one stool. She said, the bartender said, he'd set her a double scotch up there. She said, I don't drink, I never had a double. She said, I drink about 2 scotches a night when I work, but that's all night. She said, and he had put a double scotch up there, and he said, this is on the boss, and for the rest of the evening they're on the boss. You better sit down here and drink that drink. So she sat down, and she said she kind of hurriedly went through that double, and the bartender set a second double up there and said, you better get your fanny back to the